when you die.
Dad, I gotta die like that? You told my shit?
Damn, bitch.
I gotta die if I tell what happened?
Give me my phone.
That's crazy, y'all. I ain't really gonna die behind this, all y'all won't know that tea right now.
Give me my phone.
Mark done got quiet. Where he at? He right here. He getting mad. He don't like the truth coming out.
A phone screen lights up a dark living room. A woman is holding it up, recording herself, breathing hard. A man is a few feet away, pacing closer with every second. In the comments section below the video, strangers are already typing the same things over and over. Leave. Call someone. Get out of there. None of them know it yet, but they're watching some of the final hours of two people's lives, streaming live in real time for free to anyone scrolling past. Earlier that same day, before any camera was on, she'd posted something to her followers. It wasn't long. She said she didn't know what to do, that she needed help before she lost her life or her freedom, and that her kids needed her. She didn't name him. She didn't have to. Anyone who followed her page already knew exactly who she meant. By the end of that night, she would be dead. And the man everyone suspected of taking her life would be behind the wheel of her own car, driving away from what he'd just done, with police already looking for him. This case involves domestic violence, a threat made in front of witnesses, and a death by suicide. If you need to sit this one out, that's completely understandable. For everyone else, this is a case built almost entirely out of public record. Live streams, Facebook posts, a GoFundMe set up by the family, and a state investigation that later confirmed exactly what happened in that house. If you want cases covered this thoroughly with the actual documents and timelines instead of guesswork, subscribe, because that's the standard here every time. This is Trial of Clues. Don't forget to like, drop your thoughts, and subscribe. Now let's go back to the beginning and meet the two people at the center of it. Her name was Zaria Khadijah Carr, born Zaria Cummings. She was 27 years old, living in Twin City, a small town in Emmanuel County, Georgia, roughly 80 miles northwest of Savannah. Online, she went by Duchess Dior, and her page had grown to around 35,000 followers, people who watched her post about motherhood, her daily life, and her relationship. She was a mother of two. Her son was 8 years old. Her daughter was only 7 months old at the time all of this happened, which means Zaria was raising an infant and a young school-age child while managing a public platform and a marriage that was, by every account that surfaced afterward, difficult. People who knew her personally describe her, in the months since, in strikingly consistent terms. Friends who left messages for her family talked about her laugh, the way she'd call people by name in a certain sing-song tone, the way she made people feel remembered. Family members describe her as a loving mother who always put her children first, someone whose smile lit up a room. None of that shows up in a police report. It shows up in how the people who actually knew her chose to remember her once she was gone. Her online presence, built under the name Duchess Dior, followed a format familiar to anyone who spends time in that corner of social media. It wasn't a polished brand page. It was closer to a running diary, posted in pieces over time, the kind of content that builds an audience precisely because it feels unfiltered. Her followers watched her pregnancy with her second child play out in real time, saw updates about her son, and saw glimpses of her marriage, both the parts that looked stable and at times the parts that clearly weren't. That format, a public life shared in installments, is part of why her final post carried the weight it did. People who'd followed her for months or years weren't reading a message from a stranger. They were reading a message from someone whose day-to-day life they'd already been watching, which is exactly why so many of them reacted immediately when it appeared, even without knowing yet how serious the situation actually was. Her husband was Shamarcus Jemiel Carr, 36 years old, also of Twin City. Online, he went by the Frenchman, and his page had grown even larger than hers, to roughly 44,000 followers, built around his work as a French bulldog breeder. His page featured photos of the dogs he raised, snapshots of his daily life, and at times, photos from maternity shoots with Zariah during her second pregnancy. What most of his followers likely didn't know was that Shamarcus had a criminal record stretching back more than a decade. Court records show he served close to 5 years incarcerated, beginning in 2012, on charges that included aggravated assault, firearms offenses, and drug charges. That's not something that surfaced after his death. It was public record the entire time, available to anyone who looked well before June of 2025. That detail matters for a specific reason. It means the events of that night weren't an isolated departure from an otherwise clean history. They were consistent with a documented pattern of violence that existed years before Zariah ever appears in his story. To his followers, none of that history was visible. His page presented a specific version of him. A man raising and selling French bulldogs, posting about litters, prices, and the day-to-day work of running a small breeding operation. It's a common enough niche on social media, one built around a product people find appealing, and it gave him an audience that had nothing to do with his relationship or his past. That's part of what makes cases like this one difficult for outside observers to reconcile. The public persona and the documented legal history existed in completely separate spaces. Someone could follow the Frenchman for years, buy a puppy from him, comment on his posts, and have no reason to ever encounter the aggravated assault and firearms charges sitting in Georgia court records. The two versions of him, the breeder and the man with a 5-year incarceration behind him, simply never overlapped online, at least not until after June 14th, when reporters started looking into who was actually behind that account. What made this couple somewhat unusual, even within the world of online relationship content, is that they ran 2 separate, fairly large pages, each with their own following, that frequently intersected around the same relationship. The Frenchman's page, with its dog breeding content, was ostensibly about his business, but it also documented his relationship with Zariah, including that maternity photo series. Duchess Dior's page was more explicitly about her life as a mother and her day-to-day updates, but it too folded in glimpses of her marriage. Combined, the 2 pages reached close to 80,000 followers. That's a meaningful audience, large enough that when something happened on either page, it didn't stay contained to a small circle of friends and family. It reached strangers, true crime commentary accounts, and eventually national outlets like the New York Post and People magazine, all citing the same 2 Facebook pages as their primary source material. That scale is part of why this case moved as fast as it did online. Within days, sources familiar with the couple were confirming identities to national reporters, and screenshots of both pages were circulating well beyond their original follower base. It's worth pausing on how unusual that speed actually is. Most domestic violence cases never reach national outlets at all. What pushed this one into that territory wasn't just the outcome, it was the fact that the couple had already built the infrastructure for their story to travel. The audience, the platform, and even some of the documentation already existed before anyone in law enforcement got involved. Reporters didn't have to track down witnesses or piece together a private history from scratch. Much of it had already been posted publicly by the 2 people at the center of it. There isn't a detailed, publicly verified account of specific incidents in the days or weeks immediately before June 14th. No police report or statement documents a precise lead-up, and the script won't invent one where the record doesn't exist. What is established, both by how quickly people online reacted and by the nature of the final live stream itself, is that this wasn't a relationship without prior tension. The infidelity accusations that surfaced during the final broadcast weren't introduced out of nowhere. Both Shamarcus and Zaria referenced grievances that sounded, even to viewers with no prior context, like an ongoing dispute rather than something new. Whatever had been building between them clearly predated that Saturday. What's genuinely unclear, and worth being honest about, is how visible that tension was to people close to them versus how visible it was only to their online audience. Some relationships play out their worst moments entirely behind closed doors. This one, at least at the end, played out in front of tens of thousands of people who had no way to intervene in real time. That distinction matters for how this case gets talked about afterward. It's easy, looking back, to treat every public post from either of them as an obvious warning sign. In reality, most of what either of them posted before that day looked like ordinary relationship content, the kind that exists on thousands of pages without ever leading anywhere close to what happened here. The difficulty with warning signs is that they're really only recognizable as warning signs after the fact. In the moment, to most of the people scrolling past, it likely looked like two influencers airing normal relationship frustrations, not the lead up to a homicide. At around 6 p.m. on Saturday, June 14th, 2025, Zaria posted to her Duchess Dior Facebook page. She wrote that she genuinely didn't know what to do and that she needed help before she lost her life or her freedom. She said her kids needed her. She didn't describe a specific incident. She didn't name Shamarcus. She didn't need to. That kind of post, read afterward, reads like a warning. Read in the moment without knowing what would happen a few hours later, it likely read to most of her followers as an unusually raw, but not unprecedented update from someone going through a hard time in her marriage. That gap between how a message reads in hindsight and how it reads in real time is part of what makes this case so difficult for people who followed her page to sit with. The information was there. The context to fully understand it wasn't, not yet. There's also a detail worth noting about the platform itself. A Facebook post, unlike a private text message, exists the moment it's published, visible to tens of thousands of people simultaneously. It can be screenshotted, shared, and preserved by strangers within minutes, which means that even though Zaria didn't call 911 or reach out to a specific person for help, she did leave something behind that would later become part of the public record of that night, whether she intended it that way or not. Roughly 2.5 hours later, Shamarcus and Zaria would be in front of a camera together, live for the last time. At 7:43 that evening, a live stream began on the Frenchman's Facebook page. Shamarcus introduced it as a story time, a format he and other creators in his space used regularly to talk directly to their audience. Zaria appears in the video as well, and a local CBS affiliate, WTOC, later confirmed that the footage does show the two of them together. The stream ran for about 7.5 minutes. Within it, the two of them argue, with accusations of infidelity coming from both directions. It's not a monologue. It's a back and forth, the kind of argument that unfolds in real time between two people who both feel wronged by the other. Viewers who watched it live have since described the tone as tense and occasionally heated, consistent with an argument playing out in front of a camera neither of them turned off. Near the end of the 7.5 minutes, Zaria reaches over and takes Shamarcus's phone from him, laughing as she does it. The feed cuts out shortly after. That's where the public record of that stream ends. There is no footage beyond that point. That ending is one of the more unsettling details in this entire case, precisely because of how unremarkable it sounds. It's the kind of moment that happens constantly on live streams. Someone grabbing the phone, a laugh, the broadcast ending. Nothing about it, taken on its own, looks like the final seconds before a homicide. Viewers who watched it live had no reason to think they were watching the last public moment of Zaria's life. Some commented, some moved on to other content. There was no dramatic sign-off, no final warning, just an argument that ended the way a lot of arguments end online, mid-conversation, with the stream simply cutting out.
Oh, I ain't get to tell you. I ain't get to tell about Udi. Then
I swear you'll die.
I gotta die like that. You told my shit.
Damn, bitch.
Give me my
I
phone.
gotta die if I tell what happened.
Give me my phone.
That's crazy, y'all. I ain't really gonna die behind this, all y'all won't know that tea right now.
Give me my phone.
Mark done got quiet. Where he at? He right here. He getting mad. He don't like the truth coming out.
It's worth being direct about something here, because accuracy matters more than drama. Some accounts of this case, circulating on other channels, describe an explicit on-camera threat, a knife, and language suggesting Zaria's death was announced in advance during that stream. That version is not supported by the verified reporting the script is built on, including coverage from People magazine and local news out of Georgia. The GBI itself has not publicly confirmed that these specific videos are authentic recordings of the couple, only that investigators are aware both pages exist. What can be said with confidence is narrower and in some ways more unsettling because of how ordinary it sounds. An argument about infidelity, a laugh, and a stream that ends. Less than 2 hours later, Zaria was dead. At around 9:30 that night, law enforcement was dispatched to a home in Twin City following a report of a domestic disturbance. Responding agencies included local police and the Emmanuel County Sheriff's Office. When officers reached the house, they found Zaria unconscious inside. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Shamarcus was not there. Neither was Zaria's car, a black 2021 Dodge Challenger. Investigators immediately treated the missing vehicle as significant, and an alert went out across the region for both the car and for Shamarcus himself. At this point in the investigation, officers had a dead woman, a missing husband, a missing vehicle, and a 7.5-minute live stream that had gone out to tens of thousands of people less than 2 hours earlier. That combination moved fast. Within the same night, the case went from a single domestic disturbance call to an active multi-jurisdiction search. For the officers on scene, the missing Dodge Challenger wasn't just a detail, it was the single most useful piece of information they had. A car is trackable in a way a person on foot isn't. It has a license plate, a description, a make and model that can go out over dispatch channels to every agency in the region within minutes. That's exactly what happened. The alert went out for both the vehicle and for Shamarcus, and it reached far enough that within roughly 90 minutes it would be spotted more than 80 miles away in a completely different county. While that search was unfolding, Zaria's death was already being treated as what investigators would later confirm it to be, a homicide connected to the domestic disturbance call that brought officers there in the first place. There was no ambiguity, even in those early hours, about where the investigation needed to go next. Just before 11 p.m., Zaria's Dodge Challenger was located roughly 80 miles south of Twin City in Wayne County. That distance matters because it means Shamarcus had been on the road for the better part of 2 hours by the time deputies caught up to him, driving away from Emmanuel County in a car that wasn't his. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office attempted to conduct a traffic stop. Before deputies could take him into custody, Shamarcus shot himself inside the vehicle. He was taken to a nearby hospital, where he later died from his injuries. The choice to shoot himself rather than stop for deputies is its own piece of information. Even though it can't be fully explained from the outside, it closed off every possibility that existed just seconds earlier: an arrest, an interview, a chance for investigators to ask him directly what happened inside that house. Whatever answers might have come from that conversation ended in the same instant he pulled the trigger. For the two law enforcement agencies now involved, Wayne County having witnessed the pursuit and the shooting firsthand, and Emmanuel County holding the original scene back in Twin City, the case had just split into two physically separate locations, 80 miles apart, each requiring its own on-scene investigation, its own evidence collection, and its own set of officers working through what had happened. In under 3.5 hours from the moment that live stream started to the moment Shamarcus died in a hospital 80 miles from home, 2 adults were gone and 2 children had lost both of their parents in a single night. Because Shamarcus died in Wayne County, that agency's sheriff's office took on the investigation into his death, which is standard procedure anytime a death occurs during an attempted law enforcement stop. Zaria's case went to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which was requested by local authorities in Emmanuel County. The GBI's medical examiner's office was assigned to conduct her autopsy. In the days immediately after, authorities publicly confirmed the basic facts: the domestic disturbance call, Zaria's death, Shamarcus's flight and suicide, but did not release her specific cause of death. Investigators also told People magazine at the time that both deaths remained active and ongoing investigations, and that they could not confirm whether the circulating Facebook live stream footage was authentic, only that they were aware of both accounts. That gap between initial confirmation and full forensic findings lasted about 10 days. On June 25th, the police issued an update. It confirmed that Zaria had been physically assaulted before she was shot and killed by her husband. That finding moved the case from something widely assumed based on the timeline and the live stream to something officially documented through autopsy results. Throughout this period, the police also asked the public for any relevant information, a standard step in active cases. Tips could be submitted to the GBI's Regional Investigative Office or to local police, by name or anonymously. That request stayed active even after the June 25th update, since a confirmed cause of death doesn't necessarily close every remaining question about the hours between the live stream and the 911 call. It's worth explaining why an agency like the GBI gets involved at all in a case like this, rather than leaving it entirely to local police. Small departments in rural Georgia counties often don't have the specialized forensic resources that a homicide investigation requires. Dedicated crime scene technicians, a state crime lab, a medical examiner's office capable of a full autopsy. The GBI exists partly to fill that gap, stepping in at the request of local agencies for cases that need that level of resourcing. That's precisely what happened here, with both the Twin City Police Department and the Emmanuel County Sheriff's Office requesting GBI involvement almost immediately. That collaborative structure, local agencies handling the initial scene and immediate response, state investigators handling the deeper forensic work, is fairly standard for a case of this severity in a jurisdiction of this size. It's also part of why an investigation like this takes weeks rather than days, even when, as here, a strong working theory exists almost from the very first night. In most homicide cases, this is the point where an arrest leads to charges, and charges lead to a trial. That's not what happened here, because Shamarcus died the same night as Zaria. There was no arrest, no trial, no jury, no sentencing hearing. What happens instead is procedural. Once the GBI completes its investigation and Zaria's autopsy, the case file is turned over to the Middle Judicial Circuit District Attorney's Office. Some reporting describes that handoff as being for potential prosecution or further legal proceedings, but with the person responsible for Zaria's death no longer alive, it's genuinely unclear what that could still lead to. It may simply be the formal step that closes the file for good. This doesn't reflect a failure by investigators. The GBI's findings answer the central question of what happened to Zaria. What it does mean is that the part of the legal process most people associate with justice, a public trial, a jury's decision, a sentence, never had the chance to happen because there was no one left to bring in front of it. Cases that end this way present a specific kind of frustration for the people following them, whether that's family, friends, or an online audience that had grown invested in a couple's story before any of this happened. There's a natural instinct to want a formal, visible endpoint, a moment where a judge or a jury says, on the record, that this was wrong and here is the consequence. When the person responsible dies before that can happen, that endpoint simply doesn't exist. What's left instead is a completed investigative file, a documented cause of death, and a case status that reads closed, not because someone was held accountable in a courtroom, but because there's no legal mechanism left to pursue. In the days after Zaria's death, her family began the process of both grieving her publicly and figuring out how to care for her children. Her uncle, Leon Rucker, started a fundraiser on her behalf, describing her as a loving mother, a bright spirit, someone who always put her children first. He wrote that the family was now doing everything they could to raise her two children in a safe, stable, loving environment, and that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, financially or emotionally. An online memorial page filled with messages from people who knew her, co-workers, childhood friends, people who'd only interacted with her through her page. Many of the messages weren't really about the case at all. They were about small, specific memories, the sound of her voice saying, someone's name, an inside joke, the fact that she made people feel like they mattered to her. Zaria was laid to rest in the weeks that followed, in a service attended by family and friends who, by every account, were still trying to process how quickly everything had happened. The fundraiser itself outlined something practical and specific, a plan to build a savings fund for the children, meant to give them some measure of financial security in a situation defined almost entirely by instability. That kind of planning, thinking in terms of years and decades rather than the immediate aftermath, says something about how the family was approaching this. They weren't just responding to a tragedy, they were trying to build a foundation stable enough for two children to actually grow up on, starting from a night that took away the two people who were supposed to be building that foundation for them. It's a detail easy to miss in coverage focused on the crime itself, but it's arguably one of the most consequential parts of the entire story. Long after the news cycle moves on, long after this case stops being discussed on channels like this one, that fund, and the family managing it, will still be doing the actual work of raising these two kids. Zaria and Shamarcus's two children, an 8-year-old boy and a 7-month-old girl, are now being raised by extended family. In the space of a single night, they lost both of their parents, one to homicide, one to suicide, without any real chance to process one loss before the other arrived. Those children will grow up in a world where this story is permanently searchable. The Facebook posts, the live stream, the national news coverage, the GoFundMe page describing exactly what happened to their parents, none of it disappears. At some point, they'll be old enough to find all of it themselves. For the family members raising them now, that reality is likely one of the hardest parts of an already difficult situation. Grief is hard enough without a permanent public record attached to it. In this case, the platforms that hosted the relationship in the first place are the same ones that will keep hosting the record of how it ended indefinitely for anyone who searches their names. The 8-year-old is old enough to remember his mother directly, which means his experience of this loss is fundamentally different from his younger sister's. She was 7 months old. She won't have memories of Zaria in the way her brother does, only what she's told, what she's shown, and eventually what she finds on her own. Two siblings raised in the same household from this point forward are likely to carry two very different relationships with the same loss, one built on memory, one built entirely on inheritance. Go back to that phone screen glowing in a dark living room, the one from the very beginning of this video. At the time, none of the people watching knew exactly what they were looking at. Now you do. You know her name was Zaria Khadija Carr. You know his was Shamarcus Jamial Carr. You know what that 7.5-minute live stream actually shows, according to verified reporting, not the more dramatic version that circulated elsewhere. You know what the GBI's investigation confirmed on June 25th, and you know why there was never a trial to bring any of it to a formal close. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your comment. That's the whole shape of this case, built entirely from what's actually on the record, not from speculation or from versions of events that sound more dramatic than what investigators and reporters have actually confirmed. If you want more cases covered with this level of detail, subscribing is what keeps this channel able to do that consistently, case after case. If you or someone you know is dealing with an unsafe relationship, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available at 1-800-7997-233, and you can text START to 88788. Help is available, and reaching out is worth doing before a situation ever reaches the point this one did.